Great. Hello there, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to day 2, 3, however you count it. I'm Jase Lindgren. I'm a senior solutions engineer. Excuse me, a senior solutions engineer at Perforce software, and someone who loves automation, loves scripting, maybe to an unhealthy degree. One of my favorite sayings is, we don't script automations because it's easy. We do it because we think it'll be easy when we start. The people that laughed, you get it. So today I want to talk a little bit about creating custom tools to automate things inside of P4V, as well as how you can take some of those things and automate inside of Unreal Engine to work along with your Perforce Helix Core workflows. Great. So who's this talk for? This talk is for people that use Unreal. That should be easy. Someone who's a basic Perforce user. So I'm not going over basics of creating workspaces and submitting files and things like that. I'm assuming you know that, or you're going to go learn that right after this. I'm assuming you're familiar with blueprints. You don't have to be an expert. I'm not. And some basic coding knowledge. I'm going to be doing this in Python today because I think it's the best blend of powerful but really readable and nice for presentations. But we have Perforce APIs for C++, PHP, Java, JavaScript, .NET, whatever you need, you should be able to find. So we'll not be doing any C++ in this particular presentation. So what we're going to try to get to today is first talking about learning the P4 CLI, if you don't know it already, as well as the APIs that I just talked about. Then we're going to talk about making custom Python tools that we can put directly into P4V or P4Admin. And then lastly, we're going to look at how to put those into editor utility actions or editor utility widgets inside of Unreal. So to start out, we have the P4 CLI, the doorway to automation. The important thing to know here is that everything that P4V does and everything that Unreal Engine does as it relates to your Perforce server is done using the same commands that you can do on the command line. Like, there's no magic that they have access to that you don't directly through the command line. So anything you know it's possible to do, you can find a way to script it and do it. As far as learning the CLI goes, one resource here is that in your command prompt, so if I open up a terminal window here, and I type P4 help, you can see that I get some instructions about this. The important one is if you ever see a command that you don't know what it does, like you see a command, for example, fstat. You're like, what the heck does fstat mean? You can just type P4 help fstat. I can make this. And you can see you get documentation about all the different arguments you can put on it, things like that. So that's resource number 1 to check out. Resource number 2 is the Helix Core command line reference, which you can find in your handy web browser. We come over here and we go Helix Core command line reference. It'll be the first result you find. And in here specifically, if I make this bigger, there's this alphabetical list of all the commands that you can run in P4 with similar information to what you get in P4 help. So this is probably my most referenced, top of all of my bookmarks every single day, is referencing this, because there's a lot of different arguments that you can pass to these commands to customize them. So we'll come back to that later. And then the third one is searching stuff. At help.perforce.com, we have a bunch of knowledge-based articles. We'll get to one of those later in the presentation as well. But also just looking stuff up on Stack Overflow or asking in your Discord server or something like that. You'll find the commands that then you can look up and see how you could tweak those commands to get what you want. So let's do an example of this. Let me show you one of my preferred ways to learn P4 commands. And that is this log panel down here at the bottom in P4V. If you don't have this, you can go up to View and open your log panel. What's happening is that all the commands, like I said, that P4V is running are the same commands that you can access through the command line, and it's logging those all for you down here. What you'll notice, though, is it's not logging everything. So if we go up to our preferences, so of course it's going to open on my other screen. If we go to our preferences here, and we go to logging, there's these two boxes up here to show P4 reporting commands and show P4 command output for file operations. This top one is actually the main one that I'm interested in here. And we can also make it so that this logs to a file if we want to reference something later that we missed. I'm just going to hit OK. And I'll right-click here, clear this log out. And for example, if I hit this refresh button, you can see, boy, we're in a bunch of commands. And that's because P4V is trying to update all of these different pieces of the UI. And so it's going out and grabbing a lot more information than you'd probably need for your automation, since you actually know what it is you're looking for. I'll give another example here that I think is a little more reasonable. So let's come into just whatever folder here, and I'll check out a few things. OK, so now I'm going to clear this again. And I close this change list, and I open it back up. Boom, we can see we just ran 4 commands here. So this gives us a good head start to say, OK, whatever it needed to know to show me what's in this change list, this is where I can start. So in the sake of time, I won't go through all of these. I'm just going to skip to the one I'm going to focus on today, which is this second command right here, this P4F So let's do what we were just talking about. And I'm going to right-click and say Open Command Window here. And whoops. And I'm going to say P4 help fstat. And now I'm looking at this command that we have right here. And I'm saying, OK, it's P4F -O, uppercase O. OK, look, there's all these O's here. We see L outputs the file size. OK, that's good to know. We could see P here outputs the local file path, such as like on my C drive or something like that, as opposed to the depot path on the server. If we look at the next one, we see these -Rs are limiting it to specific types of files. So we have C and O. So client view, so just things in my workspace. And then O, just the files that I have opened. And then we'll see up here that we have this -E change list. It says, show me only things in the change list that I'm naming here. So that makes sense. OK, I get how it's getting this information it's showing me. And I actually realize it's getting a lot more information than I'm seeing here. And most likely, those are things that we could add as other columns in this view. So now, let's see what happens. If I take this command, I'm just going to copy it. And I'm going to come to my command window here, paste it in, hit Enter. Hey, check that out. I just got all that same information that we were just talking about. All right, so now I want to talk about how do we take this and how do we do it in Python. So Python, the API for that is called P4 Python. You'll find things are P4 something most of the time. It requires Python 3.8 or higher, and Unreal 5 uses 3.11.8, so that's no problem. And all you have to do is pip install P4 Python. We have documentation for all the other APIs if you'd rather do it in Node.js or something like that. And then the basic format for how it works is like this. From P4, you'll import the P4 class, as well as P4 exception is generally anything that goes wrong is going to come back as a P4 exception. You instantiate the class into the P4 object. You do P4 connect. And then you can just run commands. And those all go p4.run, and then the command, and then each of the arguments as different arguments to this. So you'll see that's exactly the same format as what we have here, right? It's this. We're just going P4 and then run. And then we would put fstat here, and then -olhp, -rco, -e, default, the path, all of those things, right? So that's the basic gist. And it's always going to return those to you as a list of dictionaries. So let's take a look. Let's do it. All right. I'm going to come into my UEFest folder here, live demo. And you can see I've already got a folder set up here, but let's make a new one. New folder. UEFest for real. All right, and I'm going to come in here and, oh, I don't have it set up on this one. Okay, I'm going to open this in VS Code. And I'll just open my folder. Cool, there we are. So in here, I'm just going to make a new file that's going to be called, we'll call this Changelist Size.py. And like I said, we're going to go from P4, import P4 and P4 exception. We make our P4 object. Oh dear, I always do that. Hold down the shift key too long. P4 connect. And now we'll store our results in a variable and we'll say P4.run. And then we're going to copy down this same command that we just did here. So we're going to go fstat and then -o LHP and then RCO, whoops, -e default, and then I'll just copy this path right here, put that in there, and then we'll just print out the result that we got. Now for the keen-eyed viewers in the audience, you may be aware that something's about to go wrong when I try to run this. So when I hit run, I get an error. And what's happening here is it's throwing this exception telling me that the files I'm trying to look at, that this path here is not in my workspace. So in Helix Core, you're always, like the system on your local machine is always aware of what workspace you're working in, or at least what workspace it thinks you're working in. So when you're working in P4V, that's the one that you have selected here in your workspaces. And so from P4V, if I right click and I open a command window here, what it's doing is it's actually injecting environment variables to set where you want to be, what workspace you're in. So if I type P4 set right here, I'll see that my P4 client is set to this workspace here. So client means workspace. My P4 port is the server I'm connected to, and then my P4 user is my username. So those are the three key ones, whereas if we come back into VS Code here, and I type P4 set, you'll see I don't have a P4 client set at all. My P4 port and my P4 user are the same, because those I haven't changed. I'm not connecting to multiple servers. But if I was, those could also be different too. So I can set that as an environment variable in here, but what I'm actually going to do is just do this through the debugger in VS Code. So I'm going to create a launch.json for the Python debugger, for a Python file, and it sets up this JSON file, and I'm just going to add a little part that says env. And in here, I'm just going to say P4 client, because that's the one that I was missing. And in this case, I'm going to say Jase Lindgren uefest to, and actually I'm going to do 2 and switch to my other workspace, because that's the one I meant to be in. And so now that we have that configuration, I can come here, and if I run this by hitting F5 in the debugger, it will put that into the environment before it runs it. Oh, right, because I didn't change this part. See, this is the kind of stuff that it's good to see why it's happening so that you can try to fix it. All right, now I hit F5. And no such files. That's because I checked those out in that other workspace. So let me check those out here. I'll check out some files. Now I see they're here. I come back in here, F5. Yes, thank you. See, this is why I have all the professionals up in the front row here. Okay, cool. So now we see that we get out this list of dictionaries, and I can even take it a step further and add a breakpoint here so that when I run it, I can actually inspect these variables. So I can see here, I've got a list of dictionaries. I can look at one of the dictionaries, and I can see, oh yeah, look, I've got my depot file, my client file, my path, and down here, I have my file size, which is a file size in bytes. You'll notice all these come through as strings as well. That's going to be important later. Cool. So we see that we have a way to automate this script. So now let's talk about how do we add this into P4V. So if I come to P4V, up at the top, we have a menu called Tools. If I go to Tools, Manage Tools, Custom Tools, in here I can add a new tool. And the way this works is you give it a name, you can put it in a folder. But the important part is this. Under Application, this could literally be any executable thing on your computer. So you could write your own EXEs. You could compile your own P4V tools through Unreal Engine and then run them through here and pass arguments to them. You can do very cool stuff. But for this, I'm just going to type Pi as the executable, since I have that installed on this machine, I think. We'll find out in a sec. And then if I go back to here, I'm just going to grab the path to my file. So with Python, I do pi and then the path to the file, which doesn't have any spaces in it, so we're good. Otherwise, I'd have to put it in quotes. And then you see this select button. If I hit this, I get this menu of all different things that I could have selected or that I could currently be doing in P4V. So in this case, I will take selected changelist, since that's what we were just working with. Hit OK. And if I click this button to add to applicable context menus, that means if I right-click on a changelist, if I right-click on the thing that I passed in as an argument, I'll get this as a custom tool in that menu. And then in this case, I want to run it in a terminal window because we're not doing some fancy GUI or anything like that. And I'll hit OK. Oh, I have to give it a name, of course. Changelist size. Hit OK. And now if I right-click on this, you'll see I have an option here called Changelist Size. That's the tool we just wrote. And if I run it, I'll get that output. Now, this, of course, is hard-coded to our workspace and everything that we just set up. So let's modify our file a little bit to actually get the arguments from P4V. So we're going to import sys. And down here, we're just going to go if name equals main, because we're responsible Python programmers. And we're going to get our changelist, which is going to be argv1, so that's the first argument we pass in after the script itself. And then we'll call main with changelist. So now let's come up here. We're going to put this inside of our function called main that takes changelist. And then in here, we're going to replace this argument right here with changelist. And then this path here, we can actually replace with just ... So when I said that it sets the environment variable in P4V when we run something in that context, it's also setting your current working directory. So we don't have to specify some specific path. We know that it knows what directory we're working in for our workspace. So I'll just do that. And now let's test that out. Close this. I'll run changelist size. Cool, that worked. Let's make sure that it worked by taking these, and I'm just going to move to another changelist and move Ceph. And now let's make sure it runs on a different changelist here. Cool, that worked. So now, as far as thinking about automations, there's a tool that I made that I'll pull up here for you if I just open up a different folder. Come back up here. Yeah, this one. So in here, you can see what we do is that same thing. We just ran that p4.run command. We got those results. And then we just iterate through for file and result, total up the file size of all of those, Now notice we have to make it into an int because those were all strings that came back. So we have to convert that to an int. And I did a .get file size to make sure that if any of the entries in the dictionary don't have a file size, we don't get an error. And then I nicely divided everything by 1024 divided by 1024 to get megabytes instead of bytes, which is like the most useless unit these days. So I've made this little version of it so that you can get that nice output. What I did is, and I'll link this at the end of the presentation to some of my repos that I've shared on GitHub, where I've got some tools, and one of them is a Changelist Size checker that will also run a speed test and then give you like a rough estimate of how long it will take for you to submit that, which is nice if you're trying to figure out, is this go get a coffee, or is this go out to dinner, or is this go to sleep and come back tomorrow, right? It'll give you a sense of the scope of how much you're trying to upload on your internet connection. So I'm a little short on time, so I just want to show you one more here. How many people have run into an issue where you're trying to check out a file and you can't because someone else has it checked out and it's exclusively checked out? Has anyone run into this? Yeah, okay, I thought so. So this feature is here for a really good reason. I want to say that first and foremost, that there's a good reason for this because you don't want to lose your work, right? And if you didn't have that feature, you could spend all day working on something, and then when you submit it, someone else overwrites it, and it's a whole heap of problems because binary files like uAssets can't be merged. Can't merge changes like you can with code. That said, there are some times when you do need to uncheck out somebody else's file, right? Maybe they're out for the week and you need to work on that, or they're not at their computer, or maybe it's, as often happens to me, I'm the one who has it checked out on a different computer that I don't have right now. So what you can do here is the first thing in trying to solve this problem is figuring out how do we fix it? Like, how would I manually fix it, right? So in this case, just going to do a search for Helix Core, how do I revert somebody else's file? And then here you'll find that this help article on Perforce is probably one of the top results. It is for me, but I also search it a lot. And you can see here that we can see reverting selected files from a workspace if we're on server 2015.1 or later, and boy, I hope you are, so that's almost 10 years ago. And this is the command. It's P4 revert-c, the workspace name, and then the path, the depot path to the file, right? So if we have that, we can revert somebody else's file. Now it's worth noting that this does not delete the file. It doesn't revert it like physically on their machine. It just unchecks it out. So like technically they can still go back and get their work, but it means that from Perforce's perspective, it's not checked out anymore. Someone else can work on it. Too bad for that person. They're going to have to deal with it. So this is also something that we can script in 20 lines, where you just get the file path, you run P4 opened -a, and then the path to that file to find out the workspace name where the person has it opened. And then you just run that command, right? P4 revert -uppercase-C client, which is their workspace name, and then the depot path to that file. So you can just come over here, right-click on a file that someone has checked out, and click your menu option at the bottom there. Actually, if I have a recording of this, I don't have this one set up yet, and I'm short on time. So you can see here that we can add it as a custom tool. Now I can come and revert that file. Here, we'll do it one more time. Right-click, revert file. Boom, instantly it's reverted and it's refreshed P4V. So you have to be a super user to revert someone else's files. You can revert your own files in a different workspace, which is often my situation. But you could also make this tool for your admin to be like, hey, next time I ask you to do this, you don't have an excuse to put it off because I made it really easy for you. And I'll also share a repo with this tool so that you can just download that and install it and you don't have to write it yourself. Or you can take what I wrote and make something better. And that's really my hope with this whole presentation, is that the things I'm going to show will inspire you to see what you can do so that you can go and make cooler things. I want to say, has anybody here ever made an editor utility widget or an editor utility action? Okay, cool. Yeah, this is my crowd. So in editor utility blueprints. So in blueprints that run in the editor, not ones that run in your game, you have some nodes where you can put Python code into them. And that's what I ended up using for this, because I wanted a way to kind of take the same sorts of things that I had made and put them into here. So if I come to, I made an editor utilities folder, and I'll just show you how you do this in case you haven't done this before. So if I go to editor utilities, I right click editor utilities, so not normal blueprints, editor utilities. An editor utility blueprint is how I can add right click actions to things, as well as other stuff, but that's what I'm using it for here. And then an editor utility widget is how you make a widget like this custom widget that I've made over here. And we'll come to that later. So if I come here, go to editor utilities, editor utility blueprint, and asset action utility means a right-click action that I can run on assets here in my content browser. So for version control, that makes sense. So we'll click that, and we'll say editor asset utility, and then we'll just call this demo. Right-click on this to open it up. You can come over here and restrict what classes it will be able to run on, but in our case, because we're dealing with version control, we want to be able to access everything. So I'm just going to leave that alone, so this will show up on anything in our content browser. And if I come here to functions, and I just make a new function, and I'll say Unreal Fest Demo, and let's just do something super simple like print, gosh. And we'll just say hello, right? I'll compile that, and now if I come to a file down here, any one of these, I right-click it. Under scripted asset actions, I can see Unreal Fest Demo is here. I made another one earlier called My First Action. So Unreal Fest Demo, I run it, and down here in my log, and also you saw it up in my viewport up here for a second, 2 seconds to be precise. I see the message hello. So let's think about how we might want to deal with this in terms of version control. So what we'll do here is we can say get selected assets, because we have something selected to right click on it, so we'll grab that. And then we'll just do a for each loop to go through each of those. For each one, we'll get the path. So that's this get system path. And then once again, let's just print it and compile. Now if I come and I right click and I run that scripted asset action, you can see now down here in my output window, I see the actual file path, which this system path is useful because Unreal has 3 different ways of storing paths internally, but Perforce wants file paths. It wants normal file paths. So this get system path is very useful for that. So what we could do here is we could run stuff in these Python nodes if we want to access P4 directly. Now keep in mind that you can actually do all of this in C++, which is honestly probably a cooler way to do it. I mean, definitely more, you'd be more of a super coder, super Unreal person by doing it that way. But you can do a lot of this in Python, which I like because it's kind of easier to edit right in the spot. You don't have to recompile it. But there's pros and cons to each. However, you may be noting, hang on a minute. If I'm running Python inside of Unreal, how am I going to make sure I have the right packages installed? Because I needed to pip install P4 Python earlier. I can't do that. How would I do that and make sure that I could distribute it easily? So in trying to figure out how to solve this problem, the best way that I found was actually to make a plugin. And this is going to be the simplest plugin you've ever seen. So if I come into my plugins view, I say add. I'm just going to say content only and put my name here. And I'm just going to call this, just call it P4 Python or whatever you want. This could be anything you want here. And oh yeah, okay. Is that name not valid? Oh, it unselected that. Got it. Okay. And then I'm going to hit create plugin. And now I'm going to close, oh, sorry. So when you set up a plugin, in the U plugin file, you can add a section that tells it what Python dependencies it has. And when you start up the engine with that plugin installed, it will run pip install for all of those so that you can make sure if you distribute this plugin, like putting it in your content folder, anyone else on your project would also be able to get that, and it would automatically pip install whatever those requirements are when it runs. To do like an official plugin, you need to not only put the like pip install name, but also the version and the hash of that version, just to make sure no one's going to tamper with it or break something. But for testing, if you come to your project settings and you go down to Python in here, under pip install, under advanced, there's this pip strict hash check. If you uncheck that, so by default this will be checked, but if you uncheck that, then it'll just run those pip installs. So that's what I did while I was testing this, and then in the plugin that I made that I'll link to at the end as well, went and like made sure I had the right hash so that that could run without having to come in here and check this. So now if I close Unreal, yeah, sure, we'll save that. I'll save it, and I'll come in here, and I actually do need to edit that file. So if I go to Plugins, and I go to my, is that the one I just made? No, this is the one I just made. And I'll open this with Notepad++. Oh my gosh. And I'm just going to open my other one here to show you what it should look like. And it's this. It's Python requirements, and then it's a list of dictionaries. See, I'm talking like a Python person. And platform, you can also specify different modules that get installed for like Windows or Mac or Linux. But in this case, it's all, because the P4 Python's available on all those. And then requirements. And then in this list, I just put Python, right? Super simple. And when I do that, and I'll just copy this, paste it into here. It is a JSON format, so make sure you don't have extra characters. I ran into some trouble with that. And now if I come in here and I open my uproject file, and if there was an error, you will see that in your content browser. So you can see this is actually an error from the control rig, one of the scripts in there. You'll be able to scroll up through here and see like, oh, I have an error because my JSON's formatted wrong or something like that. But everything looks good here. And if I go to my Python REPL, so if I change this from command to Python, and I say from P4, import P4, cool, I didn't get any errors. So I can see that that Python package is installed. So now, let's go to, here. And I want to show you, how am I doing on time? Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, okay. So all these bees are blocking my view here. Does anyone want a bee? Okay, saw a hand over here. One over there. Okay, all right. This is why you come to my talks, everybody. That was a pretty good throw. All right, pleased with that one. If you come by and see us, we're out at the AWS booth. We have some more bees, so come talk to us and see if you can get some more bees. Okay, cool. Let's see here. What I want to do now is talk a little bit about the pros and cons of using P4 Python in your blueprints versus using the built-in revision control tools. So Unreal has its built-in revision control system. That's the one that you set up to make sure that your project works with Perforce. And in your blueprints, you can actually use functions from that revision control. And what's great about these is that it will try to do things like if you're syncing a file, it'll unload that file and like refresh the level that you're on so that those changes will show up, versus if you've ever had the experience of having Unreal open and then you try to run get latest in P4V and it'll just hang. It's because it's trying to write over files that Unreal is using right now, and so it's saying, no, you can't change these files, I'm using these. So by doing this using Unreal's built-in functionality, it's kind of aware of that, and it's able to handle those things more properly. And then, like I mentioned, that Unreal has these different ways of writing paths. The built-in ones can use all of those different ways of writing those paths, like /game/ whatever my blueprint is, instead of having to go to the content directory. The cons are, there's a limited set of commands that you can run. It's slow to run on large numbers of files. Like you know how if you right-click and say, sync or get latest in your content browser, and it's like you're about to run a command on 100 files, this could take a long time. To me, I'm like, what? 100 what? No, that's like an instantaneous command. That should take milliseconds. What are you talking about? But it's because it's trying to work in a way that's generic enough that any of the different source control providers can kind of plug into that, depending on how they work. So it can be slow to run on a large number of files, and it only works on UAsset files and like UPlugin files, UMap files. Anything else that your content browser ignores, it also ignores. That's not entirely true. You can kind of force it to deal with those files, but it won't natively recognize them. It won't see them. On the other hand, you can use Python nodes, which we'll do in just a second here. And in those, you have the full range of functionality of all of those different arguments we saw, everything from the P4 command line reference. It can work on any file in your workspace, even something that's outside of your content directory. So a good example of this is I will often have in my project, I'll have my Unreal project folder, I'll have an imports folder, and then I'll have a DCC folder. And that's where my Maya Blender people will work. They'll export their FBXs into that import folder. And then people working in Unreal can set that up as the watch folder, like the source for your static meshes, so that then you can get those updates and then update those to update your UAssets and then submit those. So this would allow you to run commands from inside of Unreal Engine, but on those other folders that are in your same workspace. It can do things like open up external text editors for certain types of forms and can batch commands more efficiently. Like I was talking about with getting status is a really good example of you can get the status of your workspace and see if there's files you need to get very, very quickly running a P4 command, one single P4 command, versus needing to kind of iterate through and assemble this big list of arguments, which is how Unreal would do it. Like I said, because it's trying to make it more extensible and support a wider variety of source controls. Some cons, the results, they return as a list of dictionaries, which you can't get out an array of maps. That's not a thing that's allowed in Unreal. So you have to put it out as JSON and then parse it again in a different Python node if you want to do stuff with it, or just do all the processing you need in your Python. And it requires P4 Python to be installed, which is no problem because we just did that. So let me come back to my project here. And I want to show you an example of what this looks like. So and this is a plugin that I've made that I still have some work to do on it. It's a work in progress, but my blueprint library does work fairly well. So you're welcome to check this out and use it as a starting point for your own projects. I'll link that at the end. But in here, we'll see that I have one called run P4 command. And if I make this full screen, what we can see here is we take in a command and an array of arguments. So again, just like we did with P4, it's P4, the command, and then all the arguments that we want to pass in. And that goes into this execute Python script node. This one is my favorite of the Python nodes. You'll see there's these three different ones here. Python command advanced. They're nice because those can run external Python files, but execute Python script looks like this by default. But over here, you can add inputs and you can add outputs from it. And the way that you work with these is in your Python script, you just pretend those variables already exist, right? So if I just set a variable called outputs at some point or output2 at some point, once the function's done, it'll pass those out the other side. Same with things coming in from the left. You can actually see that if I, hello? Why can't I zoom in? Okay, there we go. All right, so you can see that in here where when I create my P4 object like this, instead of relying on environment variables, because Unreal Engine does not set those, I can also set those in Python. So instead of having to set that P4 user, P4 client, P4 port, I can set P4.user equals, and then P4 user is something I'm passing into it right here. So it just kind of assume that variable's been made for you already in this context. Same with P4 port, same with P4 client, which I'm getting from over here. And then you can see I'm also doing my project directory. Quick note on this is that the way I'm getting these is I have a separate function that's actually just getting the path of the saved directory, which is where these settings that you make are stored in a little INI file. So it's actually just going and like finding that INI file and reading it. If I were to do C++, there is a cleaner way to get this directly from the source control, but I found this worked fine for me. The only weirdness I had is when I first set up source control, I think it doesn't create that INI until you quit Unreal. So I did run into one issue with that where I had to quit, open it again, and then it worked. And then similarly, getting my project directory, converting it to an absolute path, because Unreal runs in the context of the engine directory. And so if you just say like, ... like in Python, that recursive wildcard, it thinks you're trying to look in the engine directory, and it'll say, that's not in your workspace, what are you doing? So I just do this quick thing to get my project directory, and up here, you can see with this command that I'm just passing that in, right? So I'm passing in command, arguments. Oh, here it is, up at the top. I'm saying OS, change directory, whoops, project directory, there. Right, so I'm getting that directory coming in and saying, set this as your current working directory so that everything works relative to the project directory, which is more like what I would think should have been the default behavior. I get why it's not, but I set that up that way. And then comes out the other side where you get just the bare JSON, or I've made an array of JSON so that if you wanted to like quickly know the number of results you got back, you could look at the length of that array. Like I said, I can't individually make those into maps because you can't make an array of maps. And then errors, those come out here. And then I have a little condition that checks if we had an error or did we have success or not. If not, we do this handle P4 errors, which actually causes a pop-up to happen on the screen. And then we get results out the other side like this. Right? So the idea is I wanted to make sort of a nice self-contained node so that from any other widget or any other tool, I can just call this run P4 command and get results back in a way that's reasonable to work with. So if I come back to, let me just dock this up here. So if I come back into here, I have an example of this where I've made this P4 status widget. This is very simple, but something I realized is that in Unreal, if you navigate to a file specifically in your content browser, you can see a little exclamation point show up if you don't have the latest version of that file. But if you're not navigating to it, there's no notification that, hey, you've got stuff that has been updated by someone else that you don't have yet. And so I said, okay, that could be a good thing to demo. Like, how would you make a tool like that? So what I've done here is I've just made these little collapsible lists. And you can see inside each one, there's just a little text field. Close that again. And I also have this configuration here, and I've just got two buttons, refresh and sync. The sync button is currently broken, so don't press that. Like I said, it's a work in progress. But what I can do here with my editor utility widget is I'll just right click and say run. And you can see I get this little status window that I can dock over here. And if I spin down configuration, you'll see that I can double check, like, is this the right server and username and workspace that I expected? This will also show me how long I'm logged in for. So I'm logged in for another 12 hours and 36 minutes. This is an important one because Unreal expects you to be logged in already, right? It expects you to have logged in through the command line or through P4V before you start working in Unreal with source control. However, if you're not logged in, it just kind of starts to fail and it doesn't really tell you why. Again, it's because they're trying to be agnostic to different platforms, I think. That's my only assumption of why that would be. So I was like, okay, why don't I have this so it'll check how long you're logged in for. And we can actually test this if I come to my terminal here and I go P4 log out. So now I'm logged out on this machine. And if I hit refresh, I actually have it so it sees that that's the error you had, and it says, hey, you're not currently logged in, open P4V and enter your password. So it's actually kind of giving you a more helpful error is what I'm going for here. And then I can hit OK and say, cool. Whereas if I were to come in here and try to check out a file, I just get like, you can't. It doesn't really explain to me why. This is Unreal's built-in revision control. So this is an area where I think that having just kind of more notifications, especially for your users that are less familiar, who don't understand these things already, I think those of us that are experienced, like, we don't even think of it anymore. We're just like, yeah, I've got to be logged in all the time. So this is helpful for that. I've also set up a refresh interval. So this just starts a timer. Oh, right. Hang on. Let's log back in. Yes. So I can set up a little interval timer here. And what this will do is it'll run this function, and then it'll say next refresh in 30 minutes. So it's just setting a timer to run the action again in that much time. So you can kind of have this run in the background, and you can see it changes the color and updates this list of what files need to be there. Like I said, my sync button is currently broken, so I'm not going to click that right now. But this is at least a way for you to know kind of what's going on, and I'll try to sync that or fix that sync button soon, because it is useful to be able to just be like, yeah, give me everything. And this will also get you everything, like I said, outside of your project directory or like alongside it, even things that, like this Python file has Python scripts in it. I can't see any of them in my content browser here, and Unreal won't let me natively sync those, but I can do that this way because I'm making a custom tool. So let me just show you at the end of the talk here just a little bit about how this works. So in here, I have this refresh button that if we come up to the graph, what we'll see is it runs this show file status function, prints a string, it runs this P4 file status, which is just like a modified version of that P4 run command I had earlier, but I just kind of put more of the logic into it so it's not having to parse that JSON over and over again. And it just sends out a list of added files, modified files, and deleted files. And then what I like about this is that this part here, this is the P4 part. This is just the make it pretty. This is just to make it pretty in your widget, right? So here's where I'm going through and actually, grabbing all these, appending them to the text boxes, setting up this with all these files, and then down in color coding, setting color coding if there's anything in those arrays. I'm enabling the sync button if there's anything in those lists, and then setting that timer for the next check. So you can also check this out yourself and kind of see what's going on here. Another handy thing that I said, hey, what if you could log in directly from Unreal? So I just made this little login window widget that when you run login, it just takes a password input, runs a P4 login command, and then tells you if you were successful or not. And if I come out here, I can show you what that looks like. If I run this, and you can see, okay, cool. I can just log in like that. I've not figured out how to make this close, so if anyone wants to talk to me afterward about how to tell a widget to destroy itself, let me know. But so what I'm getting at with all of this is I want to get you excited about what's possible when you understand just enough of what's going on in the background with all of this, like what P4 is actually doing, what source control in Unreal is doing, and just like if you took away nothing else, it's just the realization that literally anything that you can do in Unreal with source control or in P4V, you can do through the command line, which means you can do it through P4 Python or the C++ API. A bonus for those of you that are C++ programmers, in Unreal, the Perforce SDK for C++ is actually shipped in the engine already. So you don't even have to bring that in. You just have to add it in your, what's the name of it? The graph file where you're saying like what your imports are or what your packages are that you need. So it actually is a very powerful tool that you can do. You can make your own custom blueprints that way. You can run things asynchronously more easily if you're doing it in C++. So there's a lot of power to be had there. But what I like about this is that it makes it accessible to more of your TDs, more of your team. If you say, hey, I've got a basic framework for you, you can now customize things. So I've got a bunch of stuff that as I make them, like as I talk with people here, as I talk with customers, I'll hear like, oh, we've had this frustration, we've had this problem, or we've had this issue with P4. Can you help us fix this? That I'll make something and then I'll also put it up on my GitHub so that other people can access that. And also just to clarify, at Perforce, we also use GitHub sometimes. Like we're not competitors with each other. We do pretty different things. Like we work in a very different way. You can store Git repos in Perforce actually. So I just want to clarify that I hang out with GitHub people all the time. That's what I'm saying. We're cool. We're cool. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining.